faces here while we are talking about the season 2 today. We have people who have joined us on Zoom, and there are some people who might be watching on YouTube as well. So a warm welcome to each one of you. Before we start the session, let's take some time to drop down your names and which city you are from, so that we get to know each other while we are together here in this session today. With that, I'll take a quick look at the agenda for the session today. We will kickstart the session with opening remarks from Mr. Rahul Kapoor, Director, Smart Cities Mission, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Next, we'll share a presentation on the importance of the test, learn, scale methodology. Then we will move on to a panel discussion with representatives from Pimpri Chinchwad and Jana Urban Space Foundation. We will conclude with a walkthrough of the challenge roadmap and next steps towards progress submissions. Also, towards the end, we have an interactive quiz to interact with each one of you, so stay tuned for that one as well. I'll quickly take all of you through some points which we usually share before we start the workshop. So type your questions in the Q&A box. Our team will take it up from there. We will shortlist it and we'll use it to moderate the Q&A session towards the end. If you like any particular question or if you're having similar thoughts, feel free to upvote that particular question and that will come up more into our attention. While we are going through this session, please feel free to interact with each other. So chat and interact, but make sure that you are going to address the chat to panelists and attendees both so that it is visible for everyone. And towards the end of the session, as I said, we have an interactive quiz for which you would require a mobile phone or a laptop to access a particular web page. We'll share the link with you. And before we do that, we'll share a heads up so that you can keep yourself ready with that. With this, I would now like to invite Mr. Rahul Kapoor, Director, Smart Cities Mission, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, to share a few words with us and kickstart this workshop.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and glad to be back after our last meeting at Bangalore, wherein all of us did go on a cycle ride and also learned so much from each other. And I think it's been now 2 years since we started this journey. Wonderful progress that all the smart cities have made. And every time we come to these workshops and we look forward to something new. And today, of course, what I can understand is we are trying to make it more interactive by having some kind of a interactive quiz or kind of an experience today happening online. Good. I think that's up to the team behind this program. And moving forward with season 2 of the Cycles4Change challenge, I think, and the Streets4People challenge, we have 90 cities that have basically become a part of this overall movement. And I think I am probably hoping that all of you, moving on from the Bangalore workshop and all the learnings that we have got over the past, are looking forward to implementing the healthy street strategies in your overall work in the city. And of course, contribute back. Use this opportunity of this workshop by making it more interactive, by sharing your learnings. I'm sure we are looking forward to that feedback from you. Of course, what I understand that round 1 of the submissions is also just around the corner. Probably it is due in October, what I'm told. I would request all of you to kindly finalize your preparations and after that, give your submissions as well. And I would encourage all of to also share your monthly updates in the monthly update form. So this form is basically used by us here in the ministry, and it keeps us also updated on the latest that is happening in all the cities. So I would request you all to please update it regularly. And I'm also looking forward to this workshop. With that, let's see nationally healthy streets movement all across in each of our lives. Thank you so much, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for kickstarting the workshop with those words. With this, I would now like to invite my colleague, Smritika Srinivasan, to take us through a presentation on embracing the test, learn, scale mantra. Over to you, Smritika.
Thanks, Sophia. I'll just need a minute to start sharing my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Season 2 Workshop 2. Let's start this presentation, this workshop off with some quick updates from all the cities in Season 2 of the cohort of the challenges. So the first thing is that we hosted our very first clinic in the month of May, and we witnessed over 15 cities join in on this call. So cities shared common challenges with implementing healthy streets, challenges with building support, and even shared some of their updates on the progress towards the 2023 national goals. We'll also be hosting the second clinic soon after the workshop, and we look forward to having you all there for a similar successful clinic in the following months. Next, we had the very first Healthy Streets Capacity Development Workshop in Bangalore. We had the opportunity to meet many of you on this call in person, and it was also a great experience to cycle together in the streets of Bangalore. In the workshop, we've covered multiple topics such as the importance of good street design, parking management, and even institutionalizing campaigns. All of the presentations and recordings are up on our website, so please do take a look. We hope this has accelerated your progress towards the 2023 goals. And if you have any queries or concerns, please feel free to reach out to the coordination team. And here is a quick recap of the 2023 goals for the India Cycles for Change and the Streets for People challenge. As mentioned earlier, action is what your city will be doing on the ground. Foundational pieces focuses on institutional reforms and resilience, which will help your city to get the action elements done right on the ground. The communication pieces will ensure that you can build support with the citizens for effective on-ground transformations. The 2023 goals that you all are now familiar with follows the challenge mantra, which is test, learn, scale. So whenever we purchase any products, we always ask for a sample, be it food, cosmetics, stationery, whatever it is, before we choose buying the product. And that's exactly what we want with our streets too. So testing will help cities experience the future before committing to the design. And the main reason to do the tests is to ensure that we capture critical feedback and work on improving the design solutions. So now with these learnings, we can then scale it up successfully to different parts of the city. So as you work towards the 2023 goals, embrace this mantra to ensure that you are successful in your initiatives. But first, what do we even mean by testing interventions? Basically, it's an approach that uses short-term, low-cost, scalable interventions to catalyze long-term change. Here is an example to depict what we mean. This is the HP junction in Mumbai, which was redesigned with simple elements to improve safety for pedestrians at this junction. You can see very well that it was simple paints and the dividers. So the overall idea is low-cost, short-term, scalable interventions. And remember that these are quick, temporary, low-cost solutions that I just highlighted that you can also do through placemaking elements, reprogramming existing activities, simple line-out markings, and even hosting campaigns and events. So let's get innovative. Here's another example of Myth Chowki in Mumbai to show you how a tactical urbanism intervention will look like. This was how the intersection looked like before any interventions, and it clearly shows how unsafe it is for pedestrians. The after image shows how the design added in refuge islands to make it safe for pedestrians. And all of this was done through simple materials such as traffic barriers and paints. But why should we even be testing interventions before making it permanent? We'll give you 3 reasons. One is to check the design feasibility and modify the designs accordingly. Sometimes what we think works on paper will not work necessarily on the ground. So a tactical urbanism intervention will help you figure that out and incorporate the learnings of the citizens and give you an opportunity to correct the designs before you make it permanent. Here's the second reason, to gauge impact and travel behavior. So simple materials like paint, chalk, tapes, traffic cones are readily available, and these are low-cost materials that can help with simple interventions on the ground. It will help you understand the impact almost immediately. And it'll also help in understanding how pedestrians, cyclists, and even the regular traffic moves around this new intervention. The third one is to build support with multiple groups. So by testing a tactical intervention on the ground, you'll allow your citizens and other stakeholders to physically experience a different reality. And it also strengthens relationships with road users, stakeholders, and other groups. And most importantly, it also helps build support with the traffic police, shopkeepers, and so on. And like the image you can see here, here's a traffic police working with the children in doing this TU on ground. But have Indian cities done this before? And absolutely. So Indian cities have tested interventions and are continuing to do so. Here on this slide, we've highlighted Bangalore's pop-up cycle lanes on their arterial street. Kohima also created a pedestrian-only street by reclaiming parking spaces, one of their many strategies to create this pedestrian street. Gurugram also tested their intersection designs to make it safe for pedestrians and cyclists. Here are a few more examples of the tests conducted by cities in stage 1 of season 1. Cities tested cycle lanes, intersections, traffic calmed their streets, reclaimed parking, created pop-up plazas, and so much more. So check out the works on the exhibition page and get inspired. We also witness many more cities embrace this process through the placemaking marathon. I'm sure most of you on this call would have gotten a taste of testing interventions through this initiative. So head over to the Placemaking Marathon website to know more about what other cities have done. Now, Indian cities are also learning from these tests before making these interventions permanent and scaling up to other parts of the city. Let's take a look at Chennai's case. So Chennai aspired to reimagine this street, which doesn't have sufficient space for pedestrians, rather it's encroached by vehicles, into a healthy street that is much more vibrant and much more healthier for pedestrians and cyclists. They tested the design on the ground and welcomed the public to even experience the space. And now Pedestrian Plaza is made permanent and is a much celebrated space in the city. In the evenings, you can see many people thronging to this public space and just enjoying it, shopping it, relaxing, having a cup of coffee, and so many more activities. And sometimes even over the weekends, there are activities, groups of people coming in, performing music, children are using the play areas, and it's really a visual treat to be in the space. Also, Chennai recognized the importance of doing these trials from the learnings. From the pedestrian plaza learnings. And also the city is now planning on conducting quick wins across 6 neighborhoods in the city for the Mega Streets project. The Mega Streets project is focusing on getting walking and cycling interventions in the city done right. Karol Bagh is also another city that is doing tactical urbanism, and we'll share their journey on the groups, and it can also be accessible through the website. So many cities have now embarked on this journey. So stay tuned to know more about the test, learn, scale mantra from the cities themselves. And over to Sophia to continue.
Thank you, Smritika, for the presentation. It is really great to know that so many cities have already tested solutions on ground. And on that note, let's now move on to the panel discussion and hear from the cities themselves on the importance of testing the design on ground prior to permanent implementation. Today, we have 3 panelists with us. Ms. Gayatri M., Senior Associate Urban Design from Jana Urban Space Foundation. Mr. Bapusaheb Gaikwad, Executive Engineer, BRTS Department, PCMC. And Mr. Ashik Jain, Nodal Officer and Bicycle Mayor, Pimpri Chinchwad. The session will be moderated by my colleague from ITDP, Bala Nagendran. With that, Bala, over to you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thanks a lot for the panelists as well for joining us with this session. We are really looking forward to the presentations. Again, as Sophia mentioned, we really request you to stick to the time of 7 minutes for presentation, and we like to use maximum time for discussion at the very end. Gayatri, over to you. We could start with your presentation. You could also share your screen.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Bala. I'll just share my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope my screen is visible. I'm Gayatri. I'm from Chennai Urban Space Foundation. We are a not-for-profit based out of Bangalore who have been implementing urban design projects across India. So this is a couple of our learnings from tactical urbanism projects that we have done across India in different stages of our project. So I'll briefly run you through the methodology and why we feel this sort of test is important and has taken very well by ITDP even before. Eventually, our goal is to create these complete streets and have these necessary space for movement of people, utilities, corridors, and have pedestrian-friendly realms. But towards achieving this sort of a vision, we face many such challenges as consultants, as governments, and towards implementation of these projects on ground. Couple of areas which we see through our experience so far, where tactical urbanism can really help, is to establish champions for all of these projects. Before the city can go ahead and have full-blown projects, we can create champions who are going to push for these projects, get the necessary budgetary allocation, and these will serve as a proof of concept and also ensure the community and stakeholder buy-in. What we mean by the community and stakeholder buy-in is that we look at three key stakeholders in each of these projects. So there is the implementation agency who are aware of all the challenges faced on ground with respect to the civil and implementation aspects on ground. And so most of the times they are faced with a lot of challenges with respect to the users, the law enforcement agencies, whom they feel are not able to kind of understand what is happening and how these interventions will benefit the overall people. So the law enforcement from their perspective are the ones who are handling the actual vehicular pedestrian movement and understand all the conflicts and movements on ground. The users on their part face these repercussions of not having safe and comfortable movement to and from their destinations. So what we then believe the role of TU is from trials to execution is to change public opinion and the mindset of the decision maker, where just explaining designs do not work. It is a proof on ground to show how these trials can benefit one and all. It will streamline the vehicular movement. It will make sure that there are lesser friction between vehicles and pedestrian movement, which in fact leads to larger safety and also vehicular issues. So that, we also set up a robust impact study and feedback loop so that we know what our designs are capable of doing and how we can also inform the final implementation. So that the final and ultimate goal is to be execute on ground and design that has been embraced by all the stakeholders who also feel that they are part of the decision making process and also have some stake towards these implementation. Through our projects, we have done implementation in two levels. So one is a very quick method, as mentioned earlier, by just using traffic cones, paints, and ropes and markers, which has been done by the implementation agency themselves. So we just supply the drawings and all the designs on ground, and they are implemented quickly with very less turnaround time. And the trials are also tested for about a week or so. And we get the necessary feedback and quickly move on to design. So the turnaround time here is very much reduced because not a lot of time goes into making visually impactful modes. This case works well when the stakeholders are already on board and you have your one step towards implementation and you just testing the projects to ensure that all the stakeholders are on board. In some cases, all the stakeholders may not be board and you need to onboard the projects and you need to push for a larger implementation methodology to ensure that a lot of buy-in is there from the corporation or the any agencies end. So this cases we have a more visual impactful. There are paint markings, there are spaces created, public spaces created, there are pots, planters, and a lot more intervention goes into this. But this is a little bit more time taking and there is more budget allocation involved. So we have done both of these trials and had different success rates with respect to both of them. In both of these, this is the common methodology that we follow. One is to conduct robust surveys on ground. So there are visual surveys, graphic surveys, and any existing infrastructure and any issues on ground is mapped extensively so that we know the issues on ground before the design process. Then we create a baseline data. So before the trials are conducted, before any permanent implementation has occurred, we map the baseline data that is going to be measured quantitatively and qualitatively at the end of trials and also understand their impact once the final implementation is done. So this could be the continuity of your pedestrian bands, the safety of pedestrian, the time taken for any pedestrian to cross an intersection, or the any visual characteristics in that road. Also, each and every activity and every item on that particular survey is on those particular street is mapped and the baseline data is prepared. Next, we make the conceptual drawings, presentations. We still have multiple discussions with the stakeholders beforehand, before even going into the trials. So once this first cut of discussions with the stakeholders are done, we go about preparing the bill of quantities in case we are doing a full-blown TU, which requires a lot more budgetary allocation. That case, a BOQ is prepared to ensure all the necessary items and materials are there, and we can test these designs on ground. Or in case if it is a simpler version where the agency themselves can do it, it can be quickly done on ground. The necessary permissions and the buy-in from the traffic agencies are also got, and this trial can be implemented at least for a month is what is ideal, but at least a week or two is what we would recommend. Then during the trial period, we also ensure that there is constant impact assessment through surrogate measures. So we have photos and videography in place to ensure to understand what is the impact that has been happening, as well as also we have the constant user feedback survey that is also being done to understand from the different users how during the trial period, how much better or for worse their experience in this particular stretch has been. Post all these learnings and from the analysis of the impact methodology, we go about tweaking some design in case of certain feedback from the users. And that is one step closer towards issuing the final drawings and the implementation on ground. So this is sort of a timeline of a methodology from the start to the end. These are some samples of visual surveys where we record methodically all the issues that is done on ground. Then the traffic data analysis to understand what are the volume, the intensity, the modal split, to thoroughly understand what is the vehicular impact on these sites. Next is the conflict assessment. So the culmination of the visual assessment, the pedestrian assessment, and the vehicular assessment, we is zeroing in on key conflict points. So with these conflict points, it is the direct impact on the trial that need to be tested. Because most of the times in trial, we are not able to demolish obviously any of the existing structures on ground. So we need to sometimes pick and choose what are the specific conflicts that we can address. There might be certain conflicts that can be addressed only through demolition or permanent intervention, but we try as much as possible to address the major conflicts, the more glaring ones, during the trial period. So this is sort of a hierarchy of the proposals that we will be giving. So this is a sample of the tactile urbanism intervention that we did in Delhi with the Save Life Foundation. So the key the requirement for this trial was to understand and rectify the black spots in Delhi. So the intersections that were picked were places which had maximum crashes and pedestrian deaths in these locations. So the main aim was to make this junction safer for the pedestrians and the NMT users and implement traffic calming measures so that overall this junction becomes very safe for all users. Here we employed a full-blown methodology where we did all the study, the analysis, we had a BOQ, we implemented these trials, they were tested for 1 month, and repainting was done just to keep up the touch-ups were done so that these implementations were there on ground, and the budget was also about 10 lakhs per intersection. But this ensured that we were able to get a sustained impact assessment done over this period. So these are how the steps that were done. The drawings were issued, the necessary patterns or any such interventions were highlighted, and they were drawn physically on ground with our team members and also some of the contractors on board. So each of these were drawn on ground, and this is what the final trial implementation was done at the Rajghat intersection. So as you can see, there has been an increased pedestrian realm area and refuge islands for the pedestrians to cross in this junctions, and it was also streamlining the left turn movement and also preventing a lot of non-permitted movement. Typically in most intersections across India, we see people trying to take wrong turns and wrong movements, which it causes a pedestrian conflict. So these help to streamline by tightening your intersection, tightening your geometry, and making it more efficient. In terms of the impact assessment methodology, some of the key factors that were analyzed was to understand the clearance speed, what is the speed across these intersections, vehicle to vehicle conflict, the pedestrian exposure distance, that is the pedestrian, how long he's been exposed while crossing these intersections, the time taken to cross it, and also the pedestrian vehicular conflict. So what we have understood is that based on these trials and implementing non-permanent traffic calming measures, even with these non-permanent interventions, this speeds were reduced to up to 10% during the peak hours and up to 2% in the non-peak hours. And also vehicular to vehicular conflict was reduced as up to 50% between all the vehicular conflict. This means they were improved lane discipline. The traffic movement was much more efficient so as to reduce this conflict between these interventions. And the other was also the key impact was in the pedestrian exposure distance. So initially, the pedestrians had to cross 170 meters to get from one side to another side without having any breaks in between, and also depending on just the few minutes of the signal cycles in between. This posed a great threat to the pedestrian and also for the elderly and also children, and also a pedestrian nightmare to cross these intersections. So by implementing these traffic islands, we were able to reduce the distance from 170 meter to 90 meter and provide pedestrian refuge areas, and also tweak the signal cycle so that everybody cross safely. This also meant the exposure time, that is the time a pedestrian is exposed to ongoing traffic, was also reduced by 30%. With these interventions, the public realm also increased about 25%, thereby creating a very visually remarkable pedestrian realm in this area. So overall, the conflict between pedestrians and the vehicles also reduced due to all these interventions. So this was a major success in improving the safety at these interventions. So currently, these projects have been submitted, and the authorities, the PWD department has these under purview, but none of these projects are yet to be implemented on site. But the other project that is going to be implemented is this quick trials that we did for the Hyderabad intersection, along with the corporation and the traffic officials, to test key intersections in Hyderabad. So here we did a very quick trial where the GHMC, that is a corporation themselves, set up these trials in association with the police to create these new traffic islands.
Gayatri,
yeah, and
hi,
just
Gayatri. Sorry.
yeah,
So sorry to interrupt you, but if we could conclude, we'll manage to finish on time. Thank you.
Yes. So I'll just quickly run through. These were some quick interventions. But one of the key learnings from the Hyderabad is that there will be hits and misses. So for example, in this intervention, when the traffic was stopped and there was not enough enforcement, the right moving traffic blocked the straight moving traffic, and there was a traffic jam a mile long. So one thing that I wanted to iterate is, through all our experience, enforcement and design go hand in hand. Designs can solve our issues, but we require enforcement from the law agency's side to make sure that these designs that are tested on ground are implemented to the best possible way. Otherwise, the chances of them failing and thereby the stakeholder buy-in not being there completely has a larger chances of not getting the projects on ground. So that is one of the key factors of our learning from Hyderabad itself. And some of the other areas where we did a very quick one with just chalk marking and showing that how the intersections can be streamlined, and also done trials before school to make safe school zones for the children as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gayatri. Definitely, like, some of the points were very, very insightful for the cities as well. Especially, we want to talk a little more about the impact assessment that you spoke about, and also the enforcement part at the very end. We'll come back to you like after we hear from Pimpri-Chinchwad as well. Ashik and Babu sir, if you are here, you could start your presentation and please share your screen as well.
Am I audible, Lala?
Yeah, Ashik, you are.
Is the screen also visible now?
Yeah, it's visible, but then I think your voice is a little feeble. Maybe if you're close to a mic or something, it'll be easy.
Is it audible now?
Yeah, it's better now. Yes. Please stick to 7 minutes, Ashik. You can start.
Yeah. I might complete it before 7 minutes anyway. PCMC, basically the test learn skill started with this urban streetscape project for PCMC, which began in 2017. And out of all the streets in the city, 5 streets were identified, and permanent interventions in terms of the street design was planned, designed, and executed on these streets. So this was actually the first experiment that actually happened. So this happened with a workshop which was conducted for all the engineers in the city. And after that, basically all these challenges started coming up in 2020. So under Cycles4Change challenge also, there was a 4 kilometer long street which was actually tested first in tactical urbanism, and currently the tendering process is done and the final execution in terms of permanent intervention happened there. So Streets4People also, the intent of this challenge was also to test learn scale. So under this, a design competition was of course floated, and there was an assessment that happened, and the design was finally the winners were finalized, and all the basically winners were called to the municipal corporation, and all of them collectively prepared a tactical urbanism master plan. So this is basically the master plan, the plan that was prepared for tactical urbanism, and finally the execution also happened through the tactical urbanism intervention. So while after doing the execution, we also had this open streets event on these particular stretch of around a kilometer. And so this is the basic information about the the open street initiatives. So under the open street initiative, one important thing was that all the people, residents of this particular stretch of street, they were invited and they were asked what the problems are with this particular tactical urbanism intervention and this particular testing. So based on the comments that they received, the final conceptual design was prepared, and this is currently now floated into the tendering process, and a permanent street design project is going to be executed on the street. In fact, the winners of this particular the design competition were hired as consultants for this project as well. So the tendering process and the basic BOQs and everything are currently being prepared. So in terms of the NMP policy also, the NMP policy, after we prepared it, we actually went to the city, first tried explaining it to the consultants and the contractors who are executing the streets, as well as the engineers, all the engineers in the PCMC who take care of these projects. So there also we had this workshop where the engineers actually learned what the NMP policy is all about, and while executing, what are the important aspects that are supposed to be looked at. So in terms of parking policy also, PCMC adopted its parking policy in 2018, and they prepared a parking management plan in 2020 and executed implemented paid parking at 80 locations. So this was just a pilot, 80 locations. They were supposed to do it at 450 locations. So this was also tested. So there was test plan scale here also. So out of the 80 locations, almost 20 locations are currently still functioning. Other locations, it somehow failed. So now we come down to the table again, come down to our desk, and we're trying to understand what the problems with the parking policy and parking management plan is. And we're trying to refine the parking policy and come up with an updated and a refined parking management plan as well. So that is also one aspect where somehow test plan scale was adopted. Then it comes to the Harit Setu master plan, which is the NMP master plan of the city. So that also, the first stage was to go to the people and ask them what exactly they expect in the city. So a small note was prepared, which was sent across to the citizens of Pimpri-Chinchwad, and around 200 people responded to that note, saying that talking about what their expectation from the Harit Setu or the NMP master plan is. And then based on that, we also had a workshop with experts and some civil society organizations, and of course the traffic police and PCMC officials and the smart city officials. So that also actually workshop, in the workshop, it was further decided that we come up with the Harit Setu master plan. So that also, and in the Harit Setu master plan as well, one important aspect is that while preparing the master plan for the entire city, we have selected a pilot in which is a neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, things are going to be executed permanently, like all the shortcuts for cyclists and pedestrians, plus the basic street design in that particular neighborhood is going to be done. And all the learnings through that particular project are supposed to be incorporated in the master plan, which is further going to be part of the development plan as well. So that is one important way in which actually we tweak this particular thing. And based on the success of the Streets4People design competition and how it went to tender, to the tendering stage and is going to be executed soon, this old Mumbai-Pune street also was one of important arterial street in the city, which actually a competition was floated for professionals. So this is the expression of interest which actually for the professionals who could actually participate in this competition. And so they came up with their work, and one particular consultants are currently working on this entire street. So there also we actually used that the same approach as we had worked on during the Streets4People design competition. Under Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, the part 1 and the part 2 of this particular placemaking marathon, we actually had 10 different locations. So one strategy was that not just to have tactical urbanism interventions, but to have some permanent interventions also. So in the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav placemaking marathon 1, we had one location where we actually did permanent intervention, and all the other locations we had TU tactical urbanism. In the phase 2 also similarly, there were 2 interventions which were thought of as permanent interventions and 8 other locations at TU. So in the third phase of placemaking marathon, it is planned that the previously executed TU locations in placemaking marathon and 1 and 2, 2 or 3 of those locations are supposed to be selected, and based on the testing that was done in marathon 1 and 2, we are supposed to execute do the permanent execution on these 2-3 locations. So that is how we planned that. Apart from that, we've been experimenting permanent street design interventions since the last almost 4 or 5 years now. So over a period of time, there is a lot of refinement that has happened in the street design elements as well. So I just wanted to share a few photographs of how all these elements have been refined over a period of time due to this approach of test learn scale. So these are just a few pictures of how different experiments happen in terms of a permanent or a segregated cycle track, painted cycle lane, footpath with public seatings and everything. So all these different, and it is basically actively used now. Since the first few experiments, there was a lot of refinement in the design that happened, and we are still experimenting a lot of things in terms of the cycle lanes and cycle tracks. So all of that is happening. And interestingly, Urban Streetscape program, which started in 2017, now we are actually taking up more and more streets. So this is the list of all the streets which are currently under tendering process. So a lot of funds is allotted to street design projects in the city. And during the execution also, you can see that these are just pucky marking that is done before you actually do the permanent execution. So that also is an interesting part where actually the street design is tested first. The design is tested, the section is tested, the parking width is tested, the cycle track width is tested, and then finally the execution happens. So that's it from my side. Babu sir had a meeting, so he could not join. He might be able to join in some time.
Sure, Ashik. Thank you so much for the presentation. So yeah, we had heard from 2 different panelists today. We heard from Pimpri Chinchwad and also from Gayatri. We heard from different cities interventions that they were involved in. Gayatri, I would like to start from you because in the approach that we're talking about testing, learning, and scaling up, we have spoken a lot about testing process itself. But from your presentation, I would like to pick on the learning part of it. You spoke also extensively about the impact assessment of part of it. So you spoke about a lot of parameters, like starting from pedestrian exposure time to accident data, to even in terms of increasing and decreasing speed limits, etc. So if you have to point out 3 most impactful parameters that have helped you to make a case to cities and citizens, what would be them? And also, what were the different tools that you used towards this impact assessment itself?
So in terms of the most impactful one, I think the pedestrian exposure time and the conflict time as 2 most, the winning case point that I would say, because these spots that were picked, especially at the black spots of Delhi, because they had a huge amount of fatalities with respect to pedestrians and also other vehicular fatalities as well. So the main aim of this exercise was to improve and decrease conflicts and the pedestrian fatalities. So by improving and creating these pedestrian refuge islands and decreasing their overall exposure time were 2 key factors in improving the junction efficiency, so as to say. So these 2 parameters are very essential and critical in testing for any intervention on road, and especially when it comes to safety. Vehicle-to-vehicle conflict and vehicle-pedestrian conflict and the exposure time would be the key factors that needs to be tested. How we went about testing is that there is a methodology write-up that is available, maybe I could share, but the baseline data capture was through videography. So we set up cameras at different angles, and this was done in with partnership with Save Life Foundation. So they were deployed 24 hours, they deployed personnel 24 hours at site and captured via cameras the different movement and what was happening at peak hours, non-peak hours, selected time periods, and then with the baseline study and with the methodology. So each of these parameters also have a proper methodology in place, which has been part of the IRC, and the different guidelines have been prescribed for that. So using that methodology and the baseline data that is available, we have been able to arrive at these percentages and show the impacts that has been there. In terms of reduction in the pedestrian length is purely just a design feature that can be measured with the before and the after of the two interventions. But in terms of exposure and the vehicular conflict and all of that, there is a proper methodology in place that needs to be carried out.
Sure, Gayatri. So building on the same point, since you also mentioned about the methodology for these different parameters itself. So over the last year, when we were having this testing process itself, we introduced to the cities, we have been nudging them to kind of keep these interventions at least for a minimum of 1 month, so that they actually be able to capture the impact very clearly. So from your experience, what have been that ideal window? Like how many days or how many months were you able to keep up these interventions? And what had been the most impactful way for you to also capture these impact as well?
Yeah, 1 month is what we consider as an ideal time for impact, I think, because it captures a wide variety of, you'll have peak hour, non-peak hour, weekends, some busy weekends, some non-busy weekends, and, it's an ideal time, but that would involve some amount of upkeep from everybody's side, because these are just normal paint and they're not thermoplastic paint, so they might have to be repainted again, and constant monitoring on site is required so that the cones don't go off and all of that. So it requires some bit of commitment from everybody's side to ensure it lasts for that month and we are able to get the impactful impact, so as to say, for that period of month. But in the case of Hyderabad, it was there only for about a week or two, because mainly we particularly wanted to just test some parameters, with respect to vehicular movement and how the vehicular movement has been streamlined and how the free left movements and how the pedestrian refuge islands were working and all of that. So there the trial was only kept for about a week or two. But that we were going, knowing very well that the designs will work, and we were only testing a few parameters. But in the case of the Delhi intersections, because they were much large and there were critical black spots in the city, we required that 1 month of trial period to have been done.
Sure. Thank you so much, Gayatri. So we want you to go back to the testing process and go back to Ashik for that. Ashik, like one particular thing even Gayatri had mentioned in her presentation was like they spent around like 10 lakhs for an intersection. So that's the budget they allocated for one intersection. So in Pimpri-Chinchwad, when the city went about doing all of these interventions, like as you mentioned, like around 10 to 15 interventions in the last 1 year. So though some of them might be a smaller one, it would also have costed you considerable amount. So typically cities don't allocate a separate budget for TUs. So how did Pimpri-Chinchwad go about that? All that came from city's budget, or like how did you source them?
So what happened was each and every street, most of this project were obviously on public space, which mostly happened to be streets. So these interventions basically came from the operation and management of the streets, that particular fund of the each and every street. So whatever was in that area, that fund was basically used. There is no streamlined budget that is allocated to tactical urbanism interventions or testing anything. But it came, the PCMC was willing to manage it through that particular source. So interestingly, all the 2022 interventions that happened over the last 2.5 years, they all mostly came through these kind of operation and maintenance budget of those things.
Sure. Thanks, Ashik. And also another interesting thing we also noticed is you also tried to do a design for each of these interventions as well. So how did you go about the designing process? Because like in Gayatri's case, like they are a design firm, they have the skill sets and the capacity to do the design for every intersection and every tactical urbanism intervention. So how did the city go about that process?
So interestingly, PCMC basically has empaneled urban designers, who actually work on a couple of streets. Like each and every empaneled urban designer has been given a set of streets. So they already have that expertise, the support in terms of expertise there. So actually those guys also helped us. A few small locations which were not very complicated were directly dealt by us also. In fact, actually ITDP team also, ITDP Pune team also supported us with a lot of locations, the design part of those locations. Also,
Sure.
one important point I feel is that interestingly in Pimpri-Chinchwad, but it is not just tactical urbanism that was tested. The permanent designs were also tested. It's not that because there's a difference when you start to put curbs and paver blocks, the kind of problems are very different. So there also a lot of problems were understood, and then we tried to resolve them, and over the period of time that design is also improved. So that is also one area which I feel is very important, that you experiment, unless and until you experiment and test things there. The basic paint marking is okay for you to understand the width and everything, like the turning radiuses and everything, the space allocation for parking, pedestrian, walkway, and cycle tracks. But while you are playing with the level difference, I think permanent interventions and experimentations. So while we are actually executing permanent interventions, we first start with a sample of 50 meters and bring all the items, like starting from a bollard to a curb to ramp, everything is executed in that first 50 meters. It is tested there. And even before doing that, we actually do a fakti marking, or we mark it through some paint or something like that, which is actually confirmed by everyone. We go get the traffic police, we get the PCMC office engineers, the residents, and confirm it with them. And then we do that sample of 50 meters, and then the entire street of 1.5 kilometers is executed. So yeah, I thought that is also an important thing.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. So a common question to both of you as well, to understand a specific perspective from citizens especially. So we spoke about collecting data and assessing impact through like different methodology, etc. But how do you also go about capturing citizens' voices? What had been their response? Like how did they negotiate with maybe some people might have felt this as an inconvenience, some people would have welcomed it. Look, how was the response from citizens and how did you negotiate that? Gayatri, if you want to take that first.
Sometimes we were unconsciously recording it through the videography also to see how they have been navigating initially and how they are navigating it now. So there are some sort of non-verbal, non-incidental data capturing as well. But other times we have actually done user perception surveys as well to understand before how it was and after also how it is there. We have spoken to people on ground, understood from them, like, how safe do they feel to cross, and, how has this overall things have improved their ability to use this area and all of that. So we are doing actively surveys on ground to understand their perception. But in terms of sometimes citizens not responding, we have faced it with during streetscape, when a lot of house owners and commercial properties are very wary of tabletop entries to their properties, because they feel somehow it restricts access, or they won't be given enough access to their properties and all of that. So at that time, it is like Shashkar mentioned, it is about implementing those things on ground and showing them, like, hey, no, see, this is the ramp, you will have unlimited access to your property. Because a common issue that we face is that they will have an 8-meter gate, and which opens wide, and they would want that whole gate to have the whole frontage, which would basically mean half the road would just be the entry for their gate and all of that. But essentially, we try to provide only for a particular car, or in case a truck, in case of a moving and hauling, to at the center of their property, so that there's an unrestricted access to the property, because the gate, for whatever reasons, has been made that wide, but doesn't mean that at a time 3 cars are going to enter that gate. So those are some challenges that we face on ground, and we need to have some constant dialogues with the people on ground to push for these designs and show them that hey, it might work and you don't have to think. So in Bangalore, pretty much we've been able to achieve that in all our roads, that having just the required amount of openings and entry exits through the commercial and residential properties have done the trick. So yeah, it is a negotiation every day, I would say.
Sure. Ashik, how have Pimpri-Chinchwad citizens responded to it so far?
So I think interestingly, what has happened is all these challenges the 3-4 challenges that the ministry initiated along with through IPDP. Through that, actually, the getting people's perception has been streamlined now. We know the methodologies that are supposed to be used in terms of perception surveys or handlebar surveys or walking audits. So that actually is streamlined, and we are considering actually testing all these before executing any street design project. You're supposed to test it, at least the basic widths and everything. So that actually should be a part of tender itself. So you allocate some funds while you are executing a street, and that fund is just meant to test everything on that particular street. Having said that, interestingly, when we started with the urban streetscape project back in 2017, I think when many urban designers used to go and talk to the people, it was a very difficult conversation because the PCMC engineers were also confused as to what this kind of a new thing is coming up, or the traffic police and the traffic police team was completely unaware of what is happening. So I think the first step for us was to convince the PCMC engineers and make them realize that this is important. You need to allocate more space to the pedestrians, or there has to be equity in distribution of the street space. So those basic things. Now what has happened is the police, the traffic police, or the PCMC engineers, they themselves are convinced. So we are not actually debating on the basic principles of street design, like you need to have a continuous footpath, or you need to have at least 2.5 meters of footpath. So those basic elements or the basic things are there with them now. So we have additional hands to convince the citizens now. So the basic problems of the citizens are very simple. They'll say that you need to give a lot more space for vehicles. I need parking on the entire stretch. So that still happens. But since we have PCMC engineers and the traffic police convinced, they actually help us convince the citizens as well. I think that was interesting that has happened with PCMC. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashik. Just building on that, like we also are aware that like you are also working with the PCMC very closely to embed this as their process itself, and the engineers also have been really supportive in that process. So what have been the steps towards that? We are also aware that you have a toolkit or something that's been created towards tactical urbanism interventions also. If you can briefly touch upon that as well.
So actually, when AKM 1.2, the placemaking marathon first came, so the commissioner, sir, he came and said that I want all the administrative zones to at least adopt 2-3 locations in their zones and execute. So I thought everything was decentralized basically. So the basic principles of NMP, all of them were aware, but how do you simplify and make them understand what TU is? So we actually came up with a toolkit or a small manual, which actually would be easy. So the basic materials that are required, how do you test it? How do you ensure the safety while you are trying to experiment these kind of things? So we came up with a compilation of that sort, which was around 20-25 pages, and came up with some simple colors. And we actually experimented that as well. The paint which stays on the road, tarred road, and the paint which doesn't. So all those experiments happened over the last 2-3 years, and we had built a manual or a small compilation based on that.
Thank you so much, Ashik. We are also hopeful that we'll get to see more TUs from Pimpri-Chinchwad in the next 1 year or 6 months as we have the challenge going forward. Gayatri, I have one last question for you. With that, we could close. Especially from a design perspective, many times what we notice is cities also kind of consider these TUs as like a grand experiments or like a grand gesture to kind of show a lot of colors, lot of events and everything. But what we also want to stress upon is these could be like really simple interventions to ensure they can test their designs on ground. So how have you kind of been able to balance that, the aspiration to make it grand and also the reality of making it simple and efficient with respect to budget? How did you make the decisions for different projects?
Right off, can I just start off by saying like Pimpri-Chinchwad has been an amazing example, and from hearing what Ashok and his team has done, it's really heartening to see how they have taken forth to the completion, execution, all the TU. In terms of the balance between having a grand gesture and a simple intervention is just, I would say, is the stakeholder buy-in. I would say in case of Hyderabad, because the implementation agency and the law enforcement agency were convinced that this project needs to be done and it needs to be implemented, and only a certain aspects of that need to be tested out. Just in terms of in one particular intervention, it was mainly tested because that was the route to the CM's house and it was a VIP corridor. So how this intervention would function in those aspects. So certain aspects of the things were only tested. So that way it did not require a grand gesture, or they did not go for a larger space and all of that was required. But in the case of Delhi, it had to gain the eyeballs, because there were multiple stakeholders and not all the stakeholders were on board. Even during the trials with respect to State Life Foundation, the traffic police were not entirely on board. The support from them was at times not too great and all of that. So at that time, we needed a larger attention beyond the general stakeholders. You wanted to get the media involved, you wanted to get different the voices from the different things for impinging upon the need for these to get permanent interventions. So in those cases, we feel that these sort of grand gestures are required when you want a larger buy-in. You want the higher level bureaucrats to be invested into these kind of projects and see that these implementations get on ground. So I think that is what to use as a tool is, to gain that stakeholder buy-in and feedback so that these interventions are done permanently on ground for the safety and the benefit of the users on the ground. So that is the trade-off that we have faced so far.
Sure. Thank you so much, Gayatri. We also have some questions from audience, but we are also running out of time. But just to touch upon, some of the audience are also interested in knowing the framework for impact assessment in detail. So if you have some methodology to share with us, we could also share with the cities offline later. And Ashik and Gayatri, if you know of any examples in India or outside, where the TU was also looked up as a holistic neighborhood level intervention. We have seen intersections, we have seen separate street segments, but we also haven't seen any neighborhood level interventions for TU as well. So if you have any quick thoughts on that, do share right now, or anything outside this call as well and good.
Just one small thing, I think it is interesting that you point this out. Because at a neighborhood level, I think cycle infrastructure becomes very critical. When you have a street design, which is a 1.52 kilometer street that is getting executed, people are going to walk there. But when you have cycle track of just 2 kilometers, it doesn't make sense. So understanding that, actually the pilot of Harit Setu master plan that we are preparing, we have considered a neighborhood. So all this, and the main agenda is to shift the smaller trips, like a person wants to go to the gym or go to the temple or mandir, masjid, whatever. You want to go to your basic amenities, like get the basic groceries. So those trips, at least now they could be shifted to an MT. So that is the basic and the first and the last mile connectivity now that the metro and the BRTS is fully functional again. So those kind of trips are looked at, and the neighborhood is actually looked at. I think it is very important to execute and plan things for the neighborhood level. So I'm not sure of anything else. Like the TU for neighborhood is something very interesting. We could actually experiment that also.
Yeah, we are also hopeful that more cities in the call will experiment that. In the next call, we'll get to discuss with some examples as well. Thank you so much again, Gayatri and Ashik. Over to you, Sophia.
Thank you, Bara, for wonderfully moderating such an engaging panel discussion. And of course, thank you to our panelists, Gayatri and Ashik, for sharing your experiences and learnings through the process. With that, now we are moving towards the end. So we are going to do an interactive quiz towards the end, like I mentioned in the beginning. And for that, it would be good if you keep a mobile phone or a laptop handy. But before we get into the quiz, I would now like to invite Angi Shah from ITDP to walk us through the challenge roadmap and the next steps. Over to you, Angi.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thanks, Smritika, for sharing your screen. All right. It was very, very, very good to hear Gayatri as well as Ashik talking about their experiences of testing on ground within their cities. And I genuinely hope that all of you cities use those experiences as learnings as we move towards the challenge goals. And also, we will be covering the submission requirements as well. So please stay tuned till the end of this presentation. It's a very quick one. Next slide, please, Smritika. Okay, all right. So very quickly to recap these goals, and I'm pretty sure all of you are extremely familiar with these by now. We have these three larger buckets under which the goals are placed. Smritika has walked you through it. There's action, what you put on ground; foundation, what builds resilience; communication for building momentum and spreading awareness within your cities. I won't be going into the details of these goals, but quickly mentioning the goals that we will be covering in this workshop itself. So under action, we'll be covering how to go about your testing and implementing permanent cycling interventions, as well as your walking and placemaking interventions. For foundation, we'll be covering the Healthy Streets policy and the Apex Committee. And communications, we'll talk about the Open Streets campaigns. Moving into your action goals. So here's a very quick recap of the roadmap towards achieving your action goals. First, identify a new site area. Next, prepare your detailed designs. Then test these designs and capture the learnings. And finally, make it permanent. Just looking at each of these steps in a bit more detail. So this identifying a new site, this and the different typologies of sites that you can identify has already been covered in a previous workshop. So we have all of our workshop presentations as well as the videos on our website, and we'll share these links with you again if required. We request you to refer to this previous workshop to get this information. Next, to prepare your detailed designs. So all of the steps towards preparing detailed designs through hiring consultants will be covered in an upcoming workshop that's happening right next week. More details on this workshop will be shared on the groups, and this will cover the hiring of competent urban designers via rolling out an RFP. So the process of rolling out an RFP for a particular project, as well as empaneling them to make the process more efficient for all your future street projects. And all of this information in a very step-by-step process manner will be shared just next week. So stay tuned for that. And finally, actually testing the design on ground, and the panel discussion very, very well covered these processes from actual cities who have already done this. But to sort of just give you a few more examples, these are very, very simple, quick tests done with very simple materials and low cost materials on ground. So here we have Aurangabad, who has tested for stage 1 of the challenge. They had tested a segregated cycle lane with very innovative materials. So they upcycled used car tires and used them as planters along the entire stretch. I'm sure they had their own bunch of learnings, and feel free to reach out to them through our WhatsApp groups, or we're happy to connect you as the coordinating team with the teams in Aurangabad if you want to learn more about how they went about it. We have cities who also included the citizens as a part of the initiative. So they called upon volunteers to actually engage them in the entire process of testing it on ground. And as you see on the right, there's also the Bangalore testing compact intersection within a neighborhood. And they also engage with the community to be able to implement this. And it's not just about testing segregated cycle lanes and such. We have cities who've experimented multiple different kinds of interventions as well. So like you're seeing on the screen on the left, that is Jabalpur, that tested out a chicane on a local neighborhood street. And we also have the example from Milan on your right. There's a before image on the top and an after image at the bottom, where an entire intersection was almost converted into a public space using tactical urbanism as a tool. And then obviously they went through the whole impact assessment methodology and understood whether this works for their citizens. So these are all inspiring examples, and we also heard from our panel, but how do you exactly go about doing this? So we have a detailed guideline that we will be sharing with you, but quickly touching upon the steps broadly. There's pre-testing, during testing, post-testing, and the documentation phase. So pre-testing, just go ahead, plan the whole implementation thoroughly, get your designs and coordinate with all the stakeholders and get feedback from them prior to testing as well. During testing, ensure that the surface and the level is cleaned, carry out the line marking based on the drawings that you get, conduct the trial run and actually implement this test, and then try to include the community as much as possible during this process as well. After that, after you have finished testing, create a buzz about the project. So put it on your social media, get newspapers to cover this intervention, and make sure to maintain this intervention for a span of a month at least, like we heard from Gayatri as well. It's critical to make sure that not just that the intervention is on ground for a month, but the upkeep is also done for the entire month. So maintaining it well on the street is very important. And finally, documentation. So make sure that you have documented the existing condition prior to actually implementing the test. And finally, even the after condition through a whole impact assessment methodology. We have a guide that covers all of these points. So please take a look, and we will be sharing it. We're sharing it on the chat here, and we'll also share it on the groups later. Finally, coming to the do's and don'ts, a few quick points to touch upon. Ensure that there is a proper segregation if you're testing cycle tracks. So make sure that you're using some kind of material to segregate your cycle lanes when you're testing them out as a TU. Next, the entirety of the cycle tracks need not be painted, but we have to ensure that the surface is smooth so that the new riders who test out, who use this intervention as users, they get a seamless experience of your TU, and they give you the right kind of feedback. Next, demarcate legible spaces for on-street parking. Use colorful patterns for all the pedestrian realms to make them very attractive, to make them vibrant, and make sure that people can interact with it and feel like excited to be there. But this is not necessarily required for the cycle lanes, like I mentioned. And also create a traffic management plan and use all innovative materials to channelize the traffic as well. So TUs are not just for understanding how the pedestrians are using it, but also to see whether the vehicular traffic is flowing through the new design in a seamless manner. So including traffic police and getting their feedback on the TU is also going to be critical at this point. Like I've mentioned time and again, there is a guide that's covering all of these points and details. And not just that, feel free to reach out to the coordination team if you have any further questions or if you want to discuss your designs as well. Next, let's take a look at the foundation goals. So first, the healthy streets policy. We have to get started on adopting the healthy streets policy. What is a healthy streets policy? It is an intention document. It is a policy that sets out the vision, the goals, and all of the steps that are required to transform your city streets into safe, attractive, and comfortable spaces. So I'm sure all of you saw the poster that we launched at the Bangalore workshop that has all of the 10 things that make a healthy street. And this policy covers these 10 points as well. So why are you adopting a healthy streets policy? It is essentially to sustain the momentum for all of these national challenges, but not just that, but to make sure that there is resilience to constantly developing healthy streets in your city in the long term as well. Let's take a quick look at the process of adopting a healthy streets policy. So we've already note that from our end as guidance, we have already provided all of you with a template of this policy. So to start with, we want you to contextualize this template. And then once you've contextualized it, you've added your city's data, your city's information in the template, go ahead and share it with other government departments to get feedback. Once you get their feedback, update the policy. And after that, share it for public consultation to get feedback from your citizens. Once you get feedback from your citizens, once again, go over this feedback, update the policy, and finally incorporate all of these suggestions and adopt the policy. You can host interesting kinds of events around adopting the policy so that you're creating a buzz around it and your citizens also find out that this policy is now adopted. Next, remember to set up your Healthy Streets Committee. So we have covered all of the guidance around how you can go about setting up this committee in our previous workshops. So please refer to those presentations for more details. And finally, let's discuss one of the most exciting goals that we have, the communication goals. Many of you over the span of these 2-3 years have been very successfully hosting open street campaigns across the country
even on Independence Day, we saw multiple cities hosting these like closing up their streets for cars and allowing their pedestrians and cyclists to come out and engage with their streets in ways that they didn't think possible before. And different activities are taking place on the streets. We had Kohima do a very interesting open street campaign for Independence Day as well. So please keep this going. It is very exciting. It demonstrates to citizens what the potential of their streets are. And for those who haven't started rolling out their open street campaigns, it's never too late. Here are some quick steps as to how you can go about doing it. First, select multiple streets across your city, decide what timings you want to close the streets for cars and other motor vehicles, decide how regularly you want to be hosting them, open up the streets, collaborate with your local organizations and liven up your streets, host multiple activities, games, make sure that children, women, elderly, everyone has something to do and feel safe and comfortable as you host these campaigns. Obviously, capture the impact, improve on it, and then repeat it again and again. Eventually, institutionalize your open streets for long-term impact. We have 2 guides for open street campaigns. 1, to host it thoroughly from top to bottom, all of the steps. And 2, how you can go about institutionalizing this open street and making it a part of your city system. All right, that covers all of the goals. Feel free to reach out to the coordination team if you have any questions on these goals, and we're happy to answer. With that, over to you, Smritika, to summarize the workshop.
Thanks, Angi. So like Angi covered in this section of the workshop, we've spoken about how it is important to test PUs and implement them on the ground, which is both walking and cycling interventions. We've also touched upon the healthy streets policy and the process to adopt it. Like Angi mentioned, we'll be sharing the guide shortly. And we've also spoken about how cities need to create their healthy streets apex committee in the previous workshops, and the guide is available on the website as well. And the last one that we spoke about in this workshop is institutionalizing open streets campaign. So if you haven't started on any of these pieces yet, it's not too late. So get started soon. And with that, we come to the challenge timeline and submission deadlines. So first up, in October, we have the progress submission coming up. And with that, we will, following the progress submission, we will also have the Healthy Streets offline workshop too, something similar to what we had in Bangalore. And in November will be the placemaking marathon. Do remember that the placemaking marathon is a great opportunity for you to test out some of the designs that you all have developed in all these months as well. And we will also be having a third offline workshop sometime in February, and the very final submission will be in April. So the key dates that you need to remember is up on the screen, and just highlighting it again, it's the progress submission in October. The qualifying cities will move on to the final submission, which is in April of 2023. So here is what we would like for the season 2 cities to submit towards the progress submission in October. In the action piece, we request you to develop detailed designs for at least 5 kilometers of healthy street network. We'll provide more details in a submission guide itself. And we request you to test your designs through the TUs that we've just spoken about extensively in this workshop, and even initiate implementation of at least 3 kilometers of healthy streets. More details will be followed in the guide. And in the foundation piece, we definitely expect all cities to set up their Healthy Streets Apex Committee and even conduct regular meetings. And with the communication vertical, we hope that cities can host at least 5 open street campaigns in this year, and also pilot the Cycle to Work campaign. So some of the pointers that's mentioned in orange are some of the good to have pieces, but it's not mandatory for this submission. One of it under the action piece is launching other initiatives such as cycle training camps, cycle repair clinics, PBS system, and in the foundation vertical, we even have the Healthy Streets policy, which we hope you can share for public consultation by October. Again, reiterating that this is not mandatory towards the submission requirements, but it's definitely a great move for your city if you have it in by then. And last but not the least, we do have the Healthy Streets, Healthy Cities leaderboard coming up very soon. It's coming sooner than you think. So fill in the monthly update forms to showcase your progress towards the challenge goals. Sophia will be sharing the form to this leaderboard update shortly in the chat box. So do share in these updates with us regularly in the coming months as well. And again, until workshop 3, we expect you to identify your site area and develop the designs. You can use the submission guide to refer to how many kilometers is being expected for the October submission. Under the foundation piece, we expect you to have your city team form, reach out to the citizens for needed support, set up the Healthy Streets Apex Committee, and contextualize the Healthy Streets policy. And with communication, we expect you to roll out the Open Streets campaign, and ITDP will share the video and presentation of this workshop. And as Angi mentioned, we will also be having a workshop in the coming week to touch upon how cities can hire consultants and the necessary documents that you will be needing for the same. So now it's time for a very exciting segment, which is the challenge mantra quiz. And I'll hand it over to Angi to take up this quiz. Angi, you can get started in just a minute.
Sure. Thanks, Pratika. I hope all of you have geared up to answer all of the questions in this quiz. Keep your phones ready. We will be sharing a link soon, or you can either join at slido.com and type in the number 1697631, or you can scan this QR code and be able to participate in the quiz. I repeat, all of you can log on to slido.com and type in 1697631. That is the number of our quiz. Alternately, you can scan this QR code to participate. We hope all of you are doing this. The moment you sign in, you will be able to see your name on the screen. Fantastic. We're seeing more and more people joining in. This is great. Slido.com. 1697631. Okay, we'll keep this open for 10 seconds. The QR code is still on the screen. For those who want to still scan the QR code, you can use the left-hand side part of the screen to scan it. I repeat, slido.com, 1697631. Fantastic. We seem to have more than 15 to 17 participants. Just a few more seconds. Okay, shall we proceed, Smritika? Thank you all for joining in. Here on the screen, you're seeing your first question. Why should you test interventions? Here are your options. Because it saves time and cost, because it brings the community together, because it helps in understanding if the design works on ground or not, or all of the above. We'll give you a few more seconds to answer. All right, let's see the results, Smritika. Fantastic. We have 73% mentioning all of the above. All right, and let's see the right answer. Fantastic. This is great to see that most of us have understood the need to test our interventions prior to permanently implementing on ground. Okay, next question. Which of the following qualifies as an open street campaign? Closing down the street to vehicular traffic and opening it up for pedestrians, hosting an event in a ground or a large off-street open area, or none of the above? I repeat the question, which of the following qualifies as an open street campaign? Closing down the street to vehicular traffic and opening up to pedestrians, hosting an event in a ground or a large off-street open area, or none of the above? Giving you a few more seconds to answer. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Can we see the answers, Smritika? All right, 79% is saying closing down the streets to vehicular traffic and opening up to pedestrians. Let's see the right answer. Fantastic. Good to know that most of us are on page with what qualifies as an open street campaign. And the third and last question for the day. When is the deadline for the progress submissions? So it's mentioned by Smritika, it was also mentioned by Rahul sir. Is it September? Is it October? Is it November? When are we preparing for? I repeat the question, when is the deadline for the progress submission? Your options are September, October, or November. 3, 2, 1. Can we see the answers? October. I was hoping for a more 100% result on October, but good to know that we have a majority answer with October. Yes, that is the right answer. Everyone, please note that our progress submissions, round 1 submissions that will help you qualify towards your final submissions is in October. So I hope all of you are working towards that. And with that, over to you, Sophia. And here, yes, sorry, before that, on the screen, you're seeing the winners, because this platform allows us to see not just who got all of the right answers, but who got them right the fastest. So congratulations to all 5 winners. Over to you.
Thank you, Smritika and Angi, for taking us through the final course of the workshop. We now have some questions from the audience, and I would request Bala, Smritika, and Angi, all 3 of you, if you could join in to answer some of those questions.
Sure.
So one,
yeah, go for it.
yeah, go on. No, go on, Angi.
Sure. Just reading out the first question. How long should the tactical interventions be on ground? Bala, would you like to take it?
Sure, Anji. So I think we already have highlighted that in the previous panel discussion. Like the way also Gayatri had mentioned, ideally we expect all of you to keep it for at least 30 days, which is a month period. But in case you could also realize that like after a 1 week's trial, if there's a need for a change in design, you could also like keep adding changes or making revisions to your design. But ideally for you to get a good sense of the impact of the intervention, keep it for a month.
Sure. Thanks, Bala. And we have another question. We have already hosted campaigns for World Bicycle Day and Independence Day. Do we still need to host more open street campaigns? Smritika, would you like to take this?
Sure, Angi. It's great that you all have hosted campaigns for World Bicycle Day and Independence Day, but the intention of hosting these campaigns is to build the support with citizens over a longer period of time. So just hosting 1 or 2 campaigns is not going to do that. You need to, even Gayatri mentioned how keeping a tactical intervention on ground for a month is necessary to understand the impact of it, even for the stakeholders and residents. Similarly, for a campaign, a longer period of time is much more important to understand or showcase the impact and the need for having good streets in our city. So we highly recommend that you conduct these campaigns in a very regular and a more frequent manner. But to start off with, in the submission guidance, we are also expecting you to host 5 such open street campaigns. But if you do more, it's the better for your city and your citizens.
Thank you, Smritika. Over to you, Sophia, for closing.
There's one more question in the chat box. If Angi, Smritika, Bala, anyone of you would want to take this. It's addressed to Ashik, but if you could moderate this one.
Ashik, are you still around? Just checking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is on the operations and maintenance of the intervention itself. Do you have any insights on that?
So it is basically each and every street in the municipal corporation has its own operation and maintenance budget. So it is meant to detar the road, or if there are potholes, they just repair that. So that repair, operation and maintenance fund, that actually at times it is not completely utilized. So we actually use that fund for testing as of for now. But I think it is better that you have that testing budget, correct, separate budget for testing these kind of interventions. That still is not a very streamlined way of going about it. It is just using the funds that are allocated somewhere else. So if you have a separate budget, it is much more better.
Sure. Thanks, Ashik.
Thank you. So with that, we have come to the end of the second online workshop for the season 2. And today, I hope all of you have some great takeaways to take away from here. We touched on the what, why, and how of the test, learn, scale mantra. And we are hoping we'll see more and more cities embracing this mantra and moving ahead towards the challenge goals. So a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. Do reach out to the coordination team from ITDP if there are any concerns or any queries that you may have for this particular session or even otherwise. We will soon share the video and presentations and the links that we posted in the chat box for your easy reference as well. Thank you.